Dear Mr. Stube, as a resident of the state of Florida and someone who lives in the surrounding areas of Lake Okeechobee, I find the problem of the rising growth of algae from fertilizer usage to have gotten completely out of hand. I am extremely concerned with the health of the surrounding fishing industries relying on the health of the fish they catch. On top of that, the lake funnels into multiple freshwater sources that could mean disaster if those populations don't have fresh water at their disposal. So with that being said, I believe it is imperative that the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services tighten their restrictions on farmers using fertilizer in this lake. The tighter restrictions are as follows. First, they should require that all farmers be not allowed to spray during blackout periods. Second, they should have more regular checks on the percentage of phosphorus and nitrogen in the water and the distance the fertilizer can be sprayed from the water. With all these problems solved, it can create a safer environment for the fish while promoting sustainability for the farmers in the area. There is also other sustainable farming practices that can be mandated by the state, such as reclaimed water that can make spraying even less potent in the area. This lake is extremely important to me, and I understand the process of the time-consuming and potential costs of money, but the adverse effects could eventually end up in the pockets of your own. This lake is extremely beautiful, and it is a place I call home. It would most definitely mean a lot if something could be done to change this. It is important to me that all the other Floridians, that something is done to create change, to keep this freshwater lake fresh and something in our state that we can be thankful for. One of the most efficient ways that there can be put a stop to this problem is by having farmers be regularly checked to make sure that they are staying within the regulations of nitrogen and phosphorus permitted. Currently, there is only 10 different workers that work to keep these farmers in check. Their task is set up already to fail from the start. There's no way that these 10 men could possibly thoroughly check the thousands of acres surrounding the lake. With this amount of enforcement, it is impossible that these farmers could not be loading up these crops with more amounts of fertilizer than the regular amount. This seems even more likely when we know that 90% of the lake and the basins are already covered by algae blooms. Of course, the over-fertilization can usually slip up by farmers that can argue that this is necessary to make the crops larger, but it turns out that very little of the fertilizer even makes it to the plant. Most of the fertilizer gets washed away during the summer seasons of Florida, where heavy rain and hurricanes can cause fertilizer to run off the soil. This leads to the second way to strengthen the rules by implementing blackout periods, when farmers could not be permitted to fertilize the crops. In conjunction with this other change, this would allow plants to get the exact amount of nutrients they need without being washed away by the rain. But the best part about all these laws could pass much easier than you believe. As you may know, there is already a mandatory blackout period for fertilizing for homeowners in Volusia County. In Volusia County, they have already seen a decline in the amount of fertilizer runoff into storm drains, and it has helped to combat with the problem of algae blooms. With the power of passing a similar law, as well as creating a larger staff to monitor these farms from following the current laws already put in place, it could dramatically help the marine ecosystem for marine life in the lake of Lake Okeechobee and the rivers that it feeds into. One of the major benefits of creating a system that prevents over-fertilization is saving the massive fishing industry that relies on clean water in Lake Okeechobee. Florida generally nearly creates $1.2 billion in commercial sales of fisheries. This industry can completely go away if it means that all the fish are gone due to the algae blooms. At the Port St. Lucie outlet, there could be a potential dead zone for fish that would cause a massive loss of fish life. There has already been a similar situation at the mouth of the Mississippi River in the Gulf of Mexico, where much algae has built up to where fish could not even swim in this area. This dead zone for fish is currently blocked by multiple dams on Lake Okeechobee, but at the release in the case of an emergency. But in the case of a flood that happens and water must be released, it could cause major damage to ecosystems, causing problems. This problem would save industries, and this problem solved would be saving industries as well as multiple lives of fish. Lastly, another problem that could be solved is the stricter regulations could solve the crisis of drinking water. Water loaded with phosphorus and nitrogen from the algae ingested could potentially cause major problems to lungs and could potentially lead to death. There could be a potential crisis on our hands if the algae water gets into the freshwater drinking supplies of the surrounding cities and towns. Just ask Toledo. Their water supply got invaded by contaminated water from nearby farms and caused the entire city of Toledo to be forced to cut off their water supply to the entire city for a week to maintain safety. As we already know, much of the Lake Okeechobee is contaminated, so not making efforts to clean up this water is just leaving an opportunity for the problem like this to happen to us. All in all, Mr. Stube, it is so very important to me that there is a course of action that takes place that saves Lake Okeechobee. Ideally, you could propose this law to the 17th District that all farmers follow clearly mandated blackout periods and find more budget money to get more experience and more amounts of field workers to inspect these farms to follow the regulations that are already put in place by your office. Funding support for this project will be simple when the impacts are already contaminated algae water on our waterways. This can be illustrated with possible dead zones for the fish and by the scars that could be left by not having possible drinking water for towns and cities. Ultimately, I leave it up to you to make my dreams become a reality. Regards, Douglas Nikhazy.